The shampoo bottles have really lied to me on this one. I turned the sound all the way up, but adding volume did nothing for this limp, lifeless hare. In today's humble opinion, we're hopping, skipping, and jumping our way through Overgrowth. When Overgrowth first launched its early access years ago, the game was vacant but showed a tremendous amount of potential. Now that it's been released officially, I see that the vacancy was working as intended and that the potential was merely a kink in the system that the developers have since removed. It's unclear to me what course the game has taken over the duration of its development, but one question remains in my mind. What course has the game taken over the duration of its development? I don't think it was ramping up the combat system, since it appears largely unchanged since I first played the game back in January of 2014, and while the gameplay was unique and fascinating back then, it doesn't really hold up today. There are other games that have a combat focus, some of which are martial arts inspired and most of which have much clearer mechanics. For instance, in this game the enemy will perpetually block and never receive punishment. If I attempt to perpetually block, after the third hit I'm instantly disarmed, killed, or disarmed and killed. In fact, they'll often do something that kills me while they themselves are blocking, and there's nothing that communicates clearly why this has happened. Then there's countering, which just doesn't seem to work half of the time. They always manage to slip out of my grasp for no discernible reason. It makes the combat feel like it's luck-based, and that can be deeply frustrating, at least until you realize that you can completely evade combat altogether by simply jump kicking your enemies to death. There's a bit of luck involved with this strategy as well, but it's much more reliable. It would seem that the focus has been to implement a couple of campaigns, one of which is unique to Overgrowth, one of which is from its predecessor Lugaru, and the third of which is a mod that was so good relative to the rest of the content that the developer stamped it as official and grouped it with the rest of them. But the campaigns are riddled with a considerable number of flaws themselves, the primary one being that most of the levels within them are glorified sandboxes. They're mostly open with a few objects scattered around for cover and a handful of enemies to kill, which makes it feel like you're essentially just playing the same level over and over again. Add in the fact that you can clear them within mere seconds and that they're sandwiched between loading screens, and you'll start to see why this gets old quickly. There's one type of level that actually works really well, which are the levels that focus on movement and parkour. These are way different from the rest of the campaign and make use of something far more fun than the combat mechanics, the movement mechanics. They have a few problems like camera management and a couple of pieces of geometry that can be grabbed in places you don't want to grab them, but they accentuate the fluidity and physics of the game. Not only that, but because of their inherent need for solid design, you can clearly see the conscious efforts of the developer in them. These levels are the highlights of the game, and I would have loved to see the elements used in them implemented throughout the rest of the story. Likewise for the occasional stealth element. I honestly think the game would have shined a lot more if it was more about stealth and movement with combat elements rather than the other way around. Another issue that I see with the story is that its identity is muddled with an inconsistent tone. I can't tell if having so much edge that your brain bleeds just thinking about it is tongue-in-cheek irony on the part of the developer, or if the story comes by it naturally. On the one hand, the protagonist is betrayed by someone close to him and his entire family is slaughtered. On the other hand, LOL, look how doofy this dog is. On the one hand, there's slavery and murder afoot. On the other hand, ha ha ha, this wolf is dumb and can't be reasoned with, but the rabbit tries anyway. On the one hand, you can hear the sound of animals in pain every time you defeat an enemy, but on the other hand, pretend the enemies are carrots. What kind of sociopath? Combine that with hoods like these and everything gets even more confusing. Like, hoods are meant to protect your face, block out the sun, the rain, etc. What the fuck does this offer? Does it protect the identity of the rabbit? Because that's some Clark Kent level bullshit. They can't see my forehead, therefore they don't know who I am. It's clearly just there so that the audience recognizes that it's supposed to be edgy and mysterious, but it's kind of just stupid. And then there's the body horror of the midriff cats. Ugh. Overgrowth earns a 4 out of 10 for its inability to deliver any sort of cohesive experience. All of the elements are at odds with each other and it comes out feeling empty and unpolished, which isn't a far cry from what it started out as to begin with. It had a lot of promise when the game was first introduced, but it ultimately leaves those desires and speculations hanging in the air. Well, not entirely, I suppose. After all, the game seems to be marketed as a sandbox through which you can experiment to make the coolest action scenes that you can. It also boasts that it has 9 years of mod development to play around with, 2 claims that each degrade its integrity as a standalone game and make it feel more like a foundation upon which a good game could be built if you wanted to go through the trouble of making it yourself. Overgrowth just doesn't have a lot of longevity, and the rings you have to jump through to give it any make it difficult to say that it'd be worthwhile when there are so many other games on the market that provide it inherently. Even the difficulty system is mostly non-existent. I beat the entirety of both base campaigns on hard by jump kicking my way through every level. And its idea of making parkour hard was don't forget to hold right click, which was more of an inconvenience than a challenge. challenge. I'm disappointed is all. Thank you everyone for watching, and a special thanks to Wolfire Games for developing Overgrowth. Though I had a lot of complaints, it's still an ambitious and impressive accomplishment for a studio of only 4 people. There were a lot of great ideas present, but I think they were weighed down by the project's robustness. I think future endeavors would benefit from dialing back the spectacle and fluff and perfecting the core playability. If you've made it this far and enjoyed the review, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video with others. Until next time, remember that failure is not the worst case scenario to go on with your bad selves, and stay awesome.